So, today we're going to look at something a little bit more complicated. I have a flowchart that'll bore everybody with for a minute. So, a quick recap. Last time we looked at this, there was a very basic chat model that I kind of walked through. Here we're going to do something a little bit more complicated. We're actually going to have two chat sessions at the same time. So, think of the conversation if you're talking with a chat over here and it's responding and it's coming back, and then you have a second one going. All right, so one's taking you're basically have it write something, you're tweaking it, you're taking its output and you're using it in the other session, and the other session is just validating whether the output is correct. So they're talking to each other, right? This is generally at a very basic level what's known as an agentic system. So you've got one session interacting with another session. You can do this by hand, right? By just copying and pasting between two sessions. In this case, I've built the code to just kind of let that happen. So the one chat instance will be creating content files, and then it'll produce summaries, and it'll have a specific set of tools that it's using to modify that folder. And then the other one will look at the output in the folder and the output from the first chat and validate if what was created was correct. So just to kind of ground everyone, I wanted to walk through that before we look at the code. So the code itself is just an evolution of what we saw before. We always have the client, and we have two sessions, two chat sessions, both pointing to the same folder, right? Both using the same model and the same HTTP client. The difference here is my base prompt is just this: create comprehensive knowledge base for social media marketing, and some notes around creating content in a folder, essentially like calling out the fact it needs to look at the tools and build out like extensive examples. That prompt itself is used with the validator and along with the initial response. So the first instance of the chat will take that, and then it'll start making stuff in the folder. And then once that's created, on the next pass, the validator, which has a different system prompt, will basically say, here's what was initially asked, and review at a high level. The validator will use the same tool set, go and look at what was created by the first pass, and produce, essentially a critique of it, like what's missing, what's not. And then this will loop for 5 passes max. I mean, you could have it go for infinitum, or as long as you add tokens. And the feedback from the validation agent will essentially become the to-dos for the second pass of the next agent, which we'll see here. And then that response will get captured. We'll iterate the loop again. The validator will take that response, which at that point, the validator session has its own chat history, so it knows what it's already asked for. And the session actually has context too. It's not truly like like what they've talked about recently, where like you basically can get infinite context by throwing out what is relevant and capturing it and then retrieving it in and of itself. Like, I'm trying to like simplify that as best I can, but essentially this will eventually hit a context window limit in this structure. What I would need to do to make it survive ad infinitum would be to, on n number of passes, basically clear the session history of the chat session of all the messages that have been passed through it, and just let it look at the content that was created. Now that's my next step. I haven't gotten that far yet, but just FYI, that'll probably be the next stream, as I'll walk through basically how to let this thing run forever and improve on itself. The top level prompt is somewhat generic, right? Structured content, architect, blah, 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 blah. Some example structures. The key part to this is having a metadata / shadow copy of context generated along with everything that it does, and a log of it, so that the next pass can go look and see, oh, we didn't use this because reasons. We use this for reasons, and not have to go do that same research again a second time. Now that's the part that becomes critical once I clear context periodically, is that metadata is essentially like the notes it left for its previous execution or for its next execution, so that it knows to be smarter and to essentially be more refined, etc., etc. And then the same goes through for the validator side, which is the other side, right? You take whatever was generated by the first one, and then you spit it out, review the files that were created, and then you basically produce everything that was missed, and then you let it go. So I'm going to let this run, and then we'll pull up the folder, and I'll open up in VS Code just so that we can watch it work. Oh, no, we have a 404. Why do we have a 404? Live debugging on the calls. 404 on. Oh, typo. That will do it. Start again. We should see a tool call immediately, and that's how we know it's working, because the first thing it does is check the folder. Yep, there we go. All right, so while that's running, I'm going to go over here and just open this up in VS Code so that we can look at the files while they're generating. Simplified the tool calling a little bit just so that it doesn't create as much noise in the console as it's running. So I am curious, if you're still watching, if you want to drop a comment below and kind of call out the types of things you'd like to see, what raw API usage Agentic AI can do. Like obviously Claude and Claude Cowork, they're big right now. I'm more curious about like engineering solutions. Like what can we make with the tooling rather than use some of these off-the-shelf applications, because it's only a matter of time before Visual Studio ends up with the same set of features as Claude Code, and it's only a matter of time before Microsoft like expands Copilot to have the Cowork features, etc., etc. Like the platform is not really a moat, in my opinion, especially for all the engineers that like to tinker. They're absolutely going to build versions of those tools that are either free, cheaper, or are better, just because the masses are going to demand functionality that Anthropic's not going to be able to keep up with, in my opinion. But anyways, so we have our first pass complete. The validator is running right now, and I know that just because it's pausing right here. So we can see it created kind of this top level overview of content with nothing really called out other than the root level, with some details around the platform and platform related tips. And then the validator came back with recommendations to create modules essentially for everything, right? Full excerpts for everything, rationales, like just essentially just build everything out. So we're on the second pass now where it's looking at that and starting to build out the different parts. We should start to see more folders come through. I am a little bit conflicted about like the way that relying on the model to build the structure also means you have to rely on the model to build the metadata. So I would almost rather have a convention around the metadata that's a little bit more structured. Like say we just created the get it started, we have an audit checklist, etc., etc. I would almost prefer some sort of structuring that isn't in the control of the model. Like let the model just worry about conceptual items. But it is a lot easier to just tell it to make the folder structure and not have to think. So here we are, we're on the second pass of adding content. We added getting started guides. We made tweaks. We have content for LinkedIn that it called out and it created. Let's read this. LinkedIn excels premium software, etc., etc. KPIs. I wonder if we'll see some of this get called out by the curator as either arbitrary or potentially needs to be qualified by like current, like 2026 versus 2025, etc., etc. I'm also curious to see if this in the content, it should be calling out like you need more than just LinkedIn here, for example. But it's obviously going to go back and forth a few times before it actually ends. The other thing I'll say here is structurally, I used Grok 4 fast. Make sure my audio is still working and my headset died on me. There we go. All right. So because I'm using 4.1, I'm not actually sure what level of quality we're going to get in 5 passes. I know 4 actually produced a significant amount of content. but I'm also noticing that like it's a little bit sharper coming out of 4.1. So obviously, the part nobody talks about, the model you're using, its reasoning capabilities, its tool call capabilities, because reasoning models are usually agentic under the scene. Like it's doing the same thing to reason through. Like there's multiple ping ponging sessions happening there too. That's how that works. It's not like it's some magical difference. Is they've built infrastructure to make the usage of the model that much better. Um, so this particular model, this is the first time I'm actually using it. If you use this with GPT-5, if you use this with Claude, you would obviously get very different results. You'd probably get different strategy, which that becomes kind of the tug when you're putting one of these systems together is do you want complete control? Do you want partial, like let the model kind of make decisions? Like what freeform do you want? And then you have to figure out which models can make reasonable decisions on their own. So step-by-step tactics. Oh, I just realized. I created a knowledge base for social media marketing just for premium software consulting businesses. I made a generic one yesterday that I posted to my GitHub. I'll put a link in the description for it. That's significantly more beefed out because it's not targeting premium software consulting specifically, so it has a lot more in there. But as you can see, there's some stuff for LinkedIn, which evidently is really the only thing according to this that you would need. I'm going to pick this up and run it again. Include all social media platforms with examples. And we're going to let that expand. One of the comments in the system prompt while it's catching back up is to go through and review the content that was created. Yeah, right here. Discovery first. So pull that list of files, see what's already out there. Ideally, pull the files in and then evaluate and expand. Yep. So it's pulling in the individual files for LinkedIn, for platform guides, reading them, seeing where it's at, and then going forward from there. So I'm expecting it should pretty much leave what it already has and just add more on this next pass, and then the validator will pick up from there. So I would say if you were going to make this into a reusable tool, you wouldn't come in here and tweak code. You'd make this an input. You'd probably make the passes something you could, adjust and then put additional prompts in and tweak along the way. So if we come back over here, we'll just expand these and let them kind of sit for a minute. We should see relatively soon. The other thing you don't see here while this is running is it's a reasoning model. It's making tool calls, it's making web search, it's categorizing essentially everything it needs to do, what files it needs to create, and then it's passing those to individual tool calls. So it knows write file here, I named this, etc., etc. That whole implementation, I don't know if I went into that in detail on the last one, but they're all written here. Right? This is just C#. The model knows to call create file, tells it what type of files it can create, and it takes a string type for the path and a string type for the content, and whether or not you overwrite the file. And down here, when the model comes back, it says create this here with this. I'm just getting metadata. This code then sees, oh, you called create file. Here, let me call log and create the file here with this content, pulling from the parameters of the tool call. So the model's not touching my system. This is the code that's touching my system. The model's just presuming that it needs those inputs to run the tool calls. It's really just functions at the end of the day. You're just writing functions, simple parameters that the model can know to use, and then you're just composing them. So like on the one hand, this is actually really powerful because I can create whole folder structures, run out, a whole like C# project, a whole .NET whatever, API specs, have it all built out, let the model just iterate ping pong back and forth like it's doing now to refine the metadata, the testing, the documentation, and then go with it. On the other hand, like it's kind of a one-shot tool the way that I have it here. I could very easily turn it into an interface or a REPL that you could just start asking it to do stuff and tweak stuff. And as long as the context is persisted, it can go through and like tweak and adjust and re-add stuff, etc., etc. All right, so I think we're on to reviewing this last pass, and if I interpreted that right, I should see some other things, right? Some frameworks, some platform guides. Here we have Twitter, we have YouTube. It looks like we duplicated a folder. This is one of the inconsistencies I've seen with using the model is the folder will just, it'll miss the root level and then just start building underneath. Which is another reason why I think the continuum of how much rigid infrastructure you use to let the model build stuff versus this, you almost need like a separate thing that only cares about organizing what's being created and that doesn't need to care about the content so that the model doesn't shortcut and short circuit what paths it should be using to make it consistent enough to be usable like that, like a tool. Like you would just point it at something and say go harvest whatever content you needed from like a SQL database, write some tools that let it run selects, give it the documentation for the metadata lookups for like SQL Server, and then have it build out essentially an ERD and a relationship diagram. You would have to probably think a little bit more on the rigid side just to make it useful and meaningful on the other end. Now, of course, that's going to balance with your model, because if your model has the capabilities to hold that context and be accurate for a long period of time, you might not need to. So it's going to really come down to, hey, look, Reddit. It's going to really come down to exactly what the purposes of the tools are, what you're trying to accomplish in an automated way. If you're just trying to collect information and then consolidate it. Because the other thing I would do is I would not architecturally try and build all this into one process. I would compose this. I would have maybe this broken up in and of itself into a couple different parts. And then the output is merely cataloging, like what we're doing here, content and strategies. And then I would have a second process that looks at the generated content, because this effectively becomes your interface, right? Like let's say I don't need Markdown, I need JSON. You let one pass of the tool generate the content in a format that's useful for the next stage. So you kind of spread the complexity across composable parts and bind them, isolate them for the translation. So it's a lot easier to come in and let's say the way content is captured on YouTube now fundamentally is different. Well, the front end piece, the front end caller or API caller that's reaching in and getting that information changes. Just like in like a microservice strategy or like a data pipeline strategy. That part's isolated. You just tweak that part. Or the part in the middle that's categorizing all that raw information into semi-structure so that it can move forward. Same thing. You might have the end result have to change and point to somewhere else. By the time you get there, you might almost not even need a model. You might have structured enough content from going through a couple stages of curation and validation. You can actually just integrate it right into an existing pipeline that you have. So you don't need AI all the way down, unless you do need AI all the way down, I guess is the point that I'm making. All right, so we've created some content around Twitter now on the second pass. We've created some content around Reddit, around Facebook. Not a lot of information, but some interesting sub points here and there. Obviously, I'm not trying to build a comprehensive library. I would give the instructions a little bit more leeway. I didn't want to overuse my tokens. But as you can see, right, I gave it this single prompt. Everything else is kind of generic along the way down. And it ping-ponged between these two chat sessions of validation and was able to produce, a fairly extensive set of files and footnotes and comments. And the only real like development you'd have to consider is the conceptual part of like, how do I want this to build out? That comes into your spec here on either side and how much you care about. Not sure why my headset keeps turning off, but I'm probably going to call it here just because. and then move on from there. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching. There'll be a link to that other repo that I mentioned at the beginning, so you can see it kind of touch the content that was generated for that. I'm not sure yet if I want to upload this content, this actual source code, to GitHub yet, but we'll see. Maybe by the time I get to the end of this project, then we'll see about opening it up and getting some feedback on it. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching.